Yeah.
Hi, welcome inside, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on HUBZone. It is lovely to meet and see you all. We're meet and see you all, kind of. Thankfully, COVID's out of the way for the most part, so hopefully we can all hug and schmooze one day without the whole, being weird next to another person. So let's get this show on the road. We've got business people online. You've got things to do, and we're not mad at that because so do we. We are happy to have you all here today. You are here for a reason. You are here for your businesses. You are here for curiosity, some way, some form or fashion. This webinar is going to help you and your business or someone you know with the business that could be utilizing a HUBZone to its fullest extent. This is why you're here. So my name is Kamalia Blunt. Want to thank you all for being here. I'm going to go over some housekeeping rules that we are going to experience or perform while Lily is giving her presentation, and then we are going to get this show on the road. So thank you everyone for attending today's webinar called Strategies on Using HUBZone Effectively, Part 1 of HUBZone in the Hot Seat. And our speaker today is Lily Milliner, founder and president of Build It Up LLC. And she's also a HUBZone council member. So if there's anyone who can speak on this, it would be Lily. And we are so honored and happy to have her with us today. She is truly a joy and a great wealth of information, and you all are in for a treat. Now, who am I? Who is this person that's speaking to you today? My name is Kamalia Blunt, and I am the WVE Initiative Program Coordinator under the Entrepreneurial Development and Assistance Center at Morgan State University. WVE stands for Women Veteran Entrepreneurs of Color Initiative. But this webinar is for everybody and anybody who would need this information for your business, because we want to see everybody succeed. Small businesses may be small only in nomenclature, but we make a gargantuan impact, and this is why we have those things. So, housekeeping things. One, the slide deck in today's presentation will be available after the webinar. I will email it out, but you can also email the speaker directly, and I will put those details in the chat. Next, this session is being recorded and will be posted publicly to the EDAC Morgan website. I will also put in the chat, and you will also get a follow-up email relaying the same notion. 3, we will respect RESPECT. Aretha Franklin cannot be wrong, people. We will respect Lily as she gives her presentation. But at the same time, you're actually free to converse with Lily as this presentation goes on, which is how the Q&A session will be done. So instead of holding it at the end, you could put it in the chat and we will ask it live as Lily presents. And she has also offered that if you want to, you can take yourselves off of mute and then ask your question, and then we can still go from there. Just out of respect, when it's going on, if you do not have a question, please mute yourselves, or don't be offended if I mute you. So that way there's no background noise and Lily can continue on with the presentation, or you can raise your hand and then we can go forward and make sure you get your questions asked. So other than that, please don't forget part 2 tomorrow, which Lily will touch on a little bit later. But for right now, we're going to give her the floor. Part 2 is going to have an amazing set of speakers that are also small business owners and have been through the whole spiel when it comes to HUBZone, its successes and its realities. So you can also have your questions answered by people who have gone through the nitty-gritty of what it means to be a HUBZone person. So without further ado, Lily, you have the floor, my friend.
Well, thank you, Ms. Blunt. I appreciate you introducing the session. I am so excited. One of the things, as I mentioned, as we were preparing for this session, is I really enjoy presenting. I enjoy sharing knowledge. I enjoy coaching, consulting, the whole 9 yards. But most of all, I enjoy interacting, because I tell people, if I'm in one of your classes, I act like I spent $1 million, which means nobody is going to stop me from raising my question. So if you have a question, feel free to put it out there. And if I don't have the answer, you better bet that I know who to go to get the answer. So this is meant to raise your consciousness. This is going to be one of your best hours you spent all week, and I am excited about doing this with you. So as the next slide talks about, I am the editor-in-chief of the Trailblazer of the HUBZone National Council. I've been involved with the HUBZone National Council for probably close to 5 years. I've been a board member on both of their boards, And I'm just excited about how we're able to shape the workforce. One of the things you'll notice in this slide, I focus on that great resignation that affected millions of Americans and really globally the world, because if we're not able to bring our services or our products, then our GPA for the country changes. So what I want to share with you is, once again, reminding some folks, some of you know it already, but the impact that urban and rural workforce has and the opportunity that HUBZone businesses have in positively impacting that. One of the things that we've been promoting over the last several years at the council is the opportunity to get, I call it, brilliant young people in the workforce. We got the minority serving institutions around the country that are often around these HUBZone areas. We have HBCUs. We have over 100 HBCUs, and 80% or more are in HUBZone communities. This, to me, is a talent that we need to leverage and use effectively. And that's whether you have a HUBZone company or not. This is talent that's out there. And as we've experienced the great resignation, we got to use everybody we can. Now, the mission of the council is, of course, to promote economic development, as we say, what should I say, accelerate the workforce use, as I talked about the universities and institutions, increase HUBZone contracting opportunities on the federal level. One of the things many of you may know, that there is a 3% goal that the federal government has had for many, many years. Only a few of the agencies have met it. Biden administration has worked diligently with several memorandums to change that and to have the federal agencies thinking differently and providing what we call opportunities for growth for the HUBZone communities. And once again, one of the things that we do well is advocate legislatively through the Senate, through the House, on different legislation to increase the opportunities in HUBZone arenas. As the next slide talks about, that is a slide that is so important to me because it's about the history. It's about our goals. It's about a reminder that we stimulate the economy and increase capital investment. We have that, as I mentioned earlier, that 3% goal that the federal government has not reached. And believe me, the council has done our best to beat up on them. We have the ability to have competitive sole source contracting. And a little later, I'm going to talk about that 10% price evaluation that those that are HUBZone certified need to kind of give that nudge to the contracting officers when they put these things out there for, for big companies and everything else, open procurements, to remind them that that needs to be also put in the package, because that can be the difference between you getting the contract as a HUBZone certified or a big business. So we always want to look at that. Now, one of the things that I like to remind people is that the small business community has been doing record-breaking level, even during HUBZone, of increasing employment opportunities. And that's why it's so important for those that are HUBZone certified, for those companies that are working with HUBZone certified, those big businesses, those what we call middle space businesses, to really leverage that in order to go after contracts in the GovCon space. So the next slide, more than anything, talks about how it works. Now, I know I have several people on the line. Can I have kind of a raise of hands if any of you are currently certified as a HUBZone company? I'm gonna give you a moment to put your hand up there, and Ms. Blunt will do her little counting to see who's saying that they in fact are a HUBZone company. But I want to find out how many are HUBZone certified, or as I say, on the brink of being HUBZone certified. If you can just, hit the thing or say yes in the comments, that will give me an opportunity to know who on here is already finished the process and who needs to know more about navigating that?
You got one hand raised.
Okay, so I have one hand raised. Okay. So what I want to kind of focus on then is sharing a little bit about how the HUBZone program works, and then how, whether you're a HUBZone or not, you can leverage that by partnering and teaming with a HUBZone certified company to go after government contracts. Because one of the things that I had the opportunity last month for Veterans Day, I recently moved, and I say recently, in August, moved to Austin, Texas from Maryland. So yes, I lived in Maryland for almost 40 years. And then God just moved me over to the Austin area, but I had an opportunity to go to a veterans event at Austin Community College. And at this event, I loved the term because it was military, and especially with our group here, the term allied forces. And that's what I need you to think about when working with HUBZone certified companies. These are allied forces. How when we talk about England working with the United States, and we talk about Australia and Spain and what have you, when they're, we have, going after things. This is what I need you to think about: allied forces. So HUBZone certified companies should be in your arsenal as an allied force to go after contracts, to have such a relationship that they can prime or you can prime, but you're working together continuously in order to change, I call it, the workforce in these what we call historically underutilized communities. So that allied forces. One of the things that is very important is that in order to be a HUBZone, you have to have a principal office. That means your main office with the most people located in a HUBZone area. Now, the way you know you're in a HUBZone area is you go on small business administration site, you put the zip code and the address in, and they'll let you know if it's a HUBZone or not. Very straightforward. It'll let you know if you're in the process of hiring and you're a certified HUBZone company, whether that employee has a HUBZone address or not. All of these things become very important. Once again, in order to be certified, like most things, those of you that are 8A or service disabled veteran, or even a veteran-owned company, you know it must be owned and controlled at least 51% by a United States citizen. These are important things to know before you enter into this, I call it, into this realm. The other thing that becomes so important that I love about it, and I mentioned about those academic institutions in your area. Well, in order to use or quote, check the box to say they're your employee, if they're working 40 hours a month for your company, and they live in a HUBZone, and they're doing what we call meaningful work for your company, you can actually have them as one of your HUBZone workers. This is great for university students that need that part-time job. They don't want to get out of school with a bunch of debt. This is a great opportunity to recruit from the community colleges, from the HBC, minority serving institutions, or just the institutions around your organization. So I really want to share that with you, promote that, because that's untapped resources. And the thing I like about it is a lot of these young people are so loyal. If you give them the right work and the right mentorship, they're not leaving you. They want to know that they, in fact, have a voice and that there is an allied force relationship. So remember that. As the next slide will talk about is, it talks about jobs. And all I've been talking about here is jobs, jobs, jobs. Now, I do want to remind you that many of you may not know, but on September 20th, 2023, the Small Business Administration actually put out I'll put it a press release, and it had to do with making sure to safeguard the HUBZone program and its integrity. What it was a reminder is for the companies that are kind of squiggly and not really helping the community and not giving meaningful jobs, they're cracking down on them so that the companies that I know that are doing the best possible work in these communities can soar and to be competing with other companies that are doing that work. What they wanted to do is, if there were some bad apples sitting around, they wanted to get rid of them so that the contracting officers would be completely comfortable with making sure that they were providing contracts and signing deals with HUBZone companies that were actually changing the level of economics and connection with these communities. So we look at that as a good thing because there are too many HUBZones that are doing the right thing, and I want to make sure they're protected, and so do you. So one of the things that became important because government spending is always being very careful where are we spending the money. The firms earning the revenues need to have that certification and need to be really connected to the community, once again, effectively. And then this, once again, the wages, the profit, interest, housing. You notice that that picture talks about all the different areas that when you change the economic structure of a household, it changes everything from educational institutions to criminal justice in their arena. So I just want you to be very aware that HUBZones work for America. They make a difference. That next slide moves in more to that idea of jobs, jobs, jobs. Now, I heard, as we go to the next slide, I heard something yesterday that really touched me. And the reason why it touched me is because how they quantified it. They said, we need to be looking for sunrise jobs instead of sunset jobs. And what was meant by that is when we look at the industry and we look at artificial intelligence and what it's able to do and machine learning and all of these things like even McDonald's, the more robotic stuff they have in McDonald's, the less humans they need in order to, as we say, do the job. And so what the person was talking to me about is, and I've noticed in talking to many of the HUBZone companies, especially the ones I'll interview tomorrow, they're looking at sunrise jobs, positions that are going to flourish even as the technology increases. And that's something I believe that HUBZones do better than anyone else. They look at positions that are going to make a difference and that will be sustaining, not positions that will be taken over by technology and eventually discarded. So as you see HUBZone workers and the impacts, the strengths, as I mentioned earlier, they can be full-time, they can be part-time, those 40 hours a month. They can be consultants, they can be interns, they can be volunteers. We want to engage the entire community in making a difference. Urban flight. One of the things that we saw with urban flight over COVID is that the rural areas in HUBZone rural areas dramatically increased with the census this past year. And with that, that means that more people are living in rural areas that moved out of the urban areas because they could work virtually. And the impact of COVID was having such an impact, they wanted to be close to their families that might have been in the rural areas. So what I want to share with you is, once again, businesses and HUBZone businesses that are in these rural areas have an unbelievable opportunity to leverage all that talent that made a decision to leave these urban and suburban areas and come out and hang out with them. That next generation, as I keep on saying, and this mantra is one that I'm living every single day, use your best and brightest. They come from HBCUs, minority serving institutions, and tribal colleges and universities. They're hanging out there ready for you to work with them so their career can soar. you may be the landing pad, that foundation that can make a difference. And one reason why Ms. Blunt does this thing about inviting everyone, because every small business, large business, medium-sized business has an opportunity to tap into these resources. America is its best when we're doing diversity and inclusion in every community. And this is how we're going to make it into that next decade, by using all of our talents. That next slide is a reminder of how we can do it. Those employees, as I mentioned, the legislation that connects to it, how you make sure to stay certified and as we call it, ready for these contracts, what it means to reside in a particular location, what it means to be part-time. Now, there was a recent change that I'm going to draw your attention to when it comes to part-time employees. And that recent change wasn't so much legislation, but how SBA was looking at job descriptions for HUBZone employees that work under 30 hours per week. So if you have that 40-hour student working or 45-hour student working, let's give that example, monthly, you now are going to be required to have a job description. And that's just good business. And that job description, if it looks a bit shaky, SBA may come back and want to see some examples of the work you're doing. But I know that the companies that I've talked with, whether they were HUBZone, whether they were service disabled, women owned, those companies are very, very thought provoked when it comes to sitting down and deciding, I'm just not hiring to just be hiring. I need them to do something that adds value to my company. And if you want them to add value, you got to have a job description. What can I say? So they know where they stand and we know where they stand. So that next slide goes a little bit more into that in talking about an employee, an additional provision that was put, which was new when they did the job descriptions. They also did something that allowed for a legacy employee. Now, this was something that the communities throughout the nation really started promoting and discussing. And this is, well, if we have an employee and they've been with our company for, say, 4 or 5 years, and they've now had meaningful, as we call it, meaningful experience, guess what? They may be thinking about moving to a different neighborhood. And maybe that neighborhood may be adjacent, but may not be HUBZone anymore. But if they were on the roster prior to that, SBA, depending on the documentation, has provided some guidance that allows you to continue counting them. And that allowed for that transition so that companies weren't kind of, almost compelling people to stay in the HUBZone. But once again, about diversity and inclusion allows people to have the ability to be mobile and live exactly where they want. So they, and we look at this and we say, wait a minute, we did such a good job with this HUBZone employee that they're making enough money that they're thinking about as, back in the day, we're moving on up. Okay. But then that gives another opportunity for that word to go back to the community to say, hey, Sally was so successful with ABC company, I want to work with them too. So it gives a well-rounded story that allows not only the company to benefit, but actually the employee to benefit. That next slide is about the connection that we've put forth.
Sorry about that. Quick question came in. When it comes to the concept of having students on, because we know there are some that they intern, but then there are some small businesses that they work alongside the university or college, and they have those interns who may be from those areas. Is there a fine line between, hey, this person is interning for me versus this is a student, but they are a paid employee when it comes to having workers under the HUBZone program? Or is there certain protocols that must be met when you're dealing with the concept of?
Yeah. That's a great question. Because one of the things when I say internships or students or university, whatever, first of all, they all have to be paid. This is not an unpaid internship. Everybody gets paid here. We just don't show up and you use my talents and happy, happy, happy. No, everybody gets paid here. Now, it doesn't matter. Some of our hub zones have what I call official internship programs where they do all of this training and it's lengthy and everything else. Like Hive Group is an example, a HUBZone company that has an extensive program where they let them work under different organizations, or I said different contracts, and they rotate them so they have an opportunity to understand what it might be to be in cybersecurity, what it might be to be in HR, what it might be to be in just management consulting. So they'll work through the different programs and contracts throughout that company. Whereas some, it's not formal. They'll hire somebody maybe to do business development that happens to go to a university, that could be Morgan State University, and business development. And that person will work 40 hours. And one week they might work 5 hours. The next week they might work 20 hours. And they're doing research in order to go after contracts. There are others that are doing data analytics that are using their degree in order to do that, or cyber, what have you. I've known some that are responsible for just ghosting computers, so that they can go out to their staff and whatever. There are all kinds of positions and titles and job descriptions that's out there. But the key is whether you call it an internship, whether you just call it a part-time employee, it has to be at least 40 hours a month. It has to be paid. And based on what state you're in, it has to be that state's at least minimum wage.
Thank you.
Does that answer?
Yes, it does.
Okay, fabulous. Now, to assist in that process, the council has in fact instituted what we call HUBZone Council Workforce Connection Program. This is, as you see, a program where you can go on our website and individuals can put their resumes, if they live in a hub zone or whatever, put their resumes online, and job seekers, and I'll call it job seekers, and on one end, but employers can in fact navigate to see, hey, this individual, we need somebody, let's say somebody's sitting in Texas where I am, but the position that we're looking for is in Baltimore. Well, if it can be virtual, then you can have a discussion about what we need you to do. But if it's not, then the company might be the Habit Group that's located in Austin, Texas. And in that case, they will go ahead and bring them in for an interview and find out their skill set. So what's nice about this, it's a free service that allows that connection to take place. And you'll see by our nice little QR code there that when you get this, you can scan and it'll take you exactly where you need to be on our website. Now, that next slide talks about contracts. Now, we've been talking about how to effectively use HUBZone with regard to the workforce, with regard to how your company is positioned and where it resides. But for the ones that are certified or looking to get certified or work with them, it's all about contracts, because you can't hire people if you're not making money. So we're going to talk about contracts, and that next slide is going to talk about the HUBZone portfolio, the federal spending patterns over the last few years. Many of you that work in the GovCon space currently know that the data and the analytics is usually a year behind, if not 2 years behind. So some of this data is a little bit dated, but at the same time, it gives you an opportunity to see how things are moving. That next slide I love, because it gives you an idea about the portfolio and the top 10 NAICS codes. Now, what's important about this is that you see this nice little pie, but you see manufacturing, you see the color manufacturing, R&D, construction, services. But what's interesting is that close to 50% of this is under services, whether it's architectural services, whether it's technology services, it's under services. That next slide, more than anything, breaks it down even further. You'll see the HUBZone, and this is FY19 to FY 2022, and you'll see what's happening there. You'll see that over 27% is in that architectural, engineering, and construction arena, information technology, professional services. One of the things I love about this slide is it kicks the heck out of that myth that, you know, HUBZones do cleaning, they do only security, you know, no. We do the brain power stuff. We do the technical. We do the hard stuff. This is the thing that makes our job so much easier when we're pitching to a particular federal agency. We get to say, oh, well, we only have IT. Great, because we have a ton of IT HUBZones that are certified CMI level 3. We have a bunch of them ISO certified. We're in it to win it. So we get to show our talents and our strengths in an area where contracts are being let. Those are the important things. That next slide is really nice because it does, and you'll see it better when you get the slide. It breaks it down. This is, you know, by the dashboard, and you're able to see where, in fact, particular NAICS codes play strongest. And this is one of the things you'll see where you can go and do this research yourself. I like to give the slide presentations because people can go back and update it themselves because they'll show the link and where they can go. And that slide I just include as a tool so that you can replicate that and see in 2023 where we stand as we enter 2024. The
Are
next
you seeing any big industry changes when it comes to HUBZone, like in the last one? Because I know
the biggest
AI and other things. What are you guys seeing right now?
Okay, the biggest thing that we're seeing with some of the legislation that came out of DOD, we're seeing that infrastructure. We're seeing more money spent in infrastructure, construction, engineering all over the nation. Some of that money is coming down to the states, but some of that money is still residing in the federal arena. What is nifty about that is just recently, I want to say in the last month and a half, the state of Maryland passed a HUBZone set aside for the state under the public utilities. So what we're really pushing as a council is to really wake up the state legislators throughout the 50 states we have to say that federal HUBZone, you need to do it at a state level also. So we're hoping to see more opportunities, especially with Department of Transportation in all of these states under a HUBZone set asides. So that's something we're looking at. Yes, we're excited about that. This is once again just a data dump. I'm always, you know, one of the things that as we talk about AI, as we talk about these things about using data, one of the things to effectively strengthen your position in the HUBZone community, there's a lot of data, free data, that you can go to federal procurement data systems and look at that data and see how you can leverage that and position your company to win more and more business. Whether your company is HUBZone or whether it's just a plain small business, that data is still data that can be used. So that becomes so important. The next slide I'm going to be focusing on is the contracting rules and guidelines. One of the things that I said early on was that press release that the small business put out about we're cracking down. If you're slipping and sliding, you're no longer going to be in this program. And the thing that became really dangerous is they're talking about disbarment. So if you do not have the right motives, or you're being real sloppy and not dealing with compliance, I don't want you to have a situation where you're disbarred, because that stops you from going after any government contracts. And some states will say, have you been disbarred by the federal government? So, and going after contracts. So you don't want that, as we call it, questionable mark on your record. So those are the kinds of things that are very important. So as we go to the next slide, we're going to talk about the types of procurements. We have the full and open competition. We have the competitive HUBZone set aside, but we also have the sole source HUBZone contract. The next slide is going to go more into what we're talking about here. One of the things that becomes really important is that close to $14 billion were spent by the federal government on HUBZone contracts that went to HUBZones. That's a whole lot of money that it went out there, and they still didn't meet their goal. So what I want people to really be aware of, if we're talking about 14 billion went to HUBZones and they didn't meet their goal, I'm expecting it only to get better as the Biden administration pushes them to meet their goal. And that is something that you constantly need to be fully aware of. As you'll see in this one, full and open competition. And what I have there is at the very bottom in yellow, 10% higher. This means if a procurement, an RFP is put out there by the federal government, there are guidelines that need to be in place in the RFP. And if they're not, you get to send a little email to the contracting officers saying, it looks like you forgot to put that in there, that FAR that relates to that. And this means that if your bid is, after they do all the evaluations, and the evaluations basically are the same and they come down to price, and the company that wanted it is a big business, but you're 9% higher, we'll just say 9% higher, then they have to award it to you as a HUBZone. That can be very important as these things get bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, do we have any questions on that? Let's go to that next slide.
So far, no questions.
This is the FAR that relates to it. Remember, you're getting all the slides so that when you send that nice little text to the contracting officer, you say, well, per price evaluation FAR, I noticed that this wasn't included in there. So you're not saying, you're just saying, was that an oversight or whatever? This allows you to be, as we call it, in the position of educating for those that may not know it, and that you're just not speculating on, I feel this way, but the law says it. So, use it to your benefit. That next slide becomes important because now we're talking about that price preference, and you're seeing how it's added, how it's applied. Both these slides, you'll notice the blue and the red around it. These are straight from SBA slide deck. So you're not saying anything that the HUBZone Council feels. We're saying per SBA slide, and you'll see the slide. This is what it says. So this allows you to have, as we call it, how to be effective. It means to base your discussions and your arguments on what SBA is saying. That next slide is one of my favorite ones because what I did was give you an example of what this means, because sometimes when we're discussing this, they're like, okay, what does that mean? This examples were provided by SBA. I just kind of cut them out to make them real easy for you to see. But you'll see if the offer, there are multiple ways this can be offered. And you'll see if the offer is a HUBZone, and you'll see 113 million, a small business is 103, and a large business is 100 million. You'll notice that the price, you'll see before, you'll see here, the thing that becomes really important is that last bullet. In this example, the application of price evaluation preference does not benefit the HUBZone small business. And the reason why is because the small business, as you immediately see, was 103 million. And the large business was 100. So in that case, the HUBZone couldn't do anything because, in fact, the HUBZone was more than 10%. Now, that next one, this is an example of the price evaluation preference that does benefit the HUBZone. Do you see that difference? And then the last one, you'll see, since the lowest offer is not a large business, the HUBZone price evaluation preference doesn't apply. So this is I call it, this is the facts. And if you're ever kind of, wait a minute, how does this apply? This is a great slide to look at to remind you how it differentiates between HUBZone, large business, but if a small business is in play, it may not be as straightforward as you think. That next slide is another slide that reminds you that a competitive HUBZone set aside. What we've been promoting as a council is more competitive HUBZone set asides, where you'll notice even in the CIOSP 4 discussion, there was a HUBZone set aside track. So that we've been pushing for more and more, and this allows HUBZones to compete only against other HUBZones. That next slide is the legislation basically that, as we say, promotes that and is in fact what is used in order to move things to a set aside. And you'll see that language in yellow: obtain from at least 2 small business concerns. This is what we talk about effectively using the HUBZone certification. Allied forces is a word I used earlier. This is when you have the 2 or 3 different HUBZone companies that are in your same NAICS code that you're friendly with. Sometimes you're working, teaming together. Sometimes you're competing against each other. But this is when you pick up the phone and say, and I've done this with the Air Force, where I've called my friends with a different, in cybersecurity and said, they're putting out a cybersecurity. Can you at least respond to the sources sought so that we have the 2 or 3? And they'll do that. And what we found is the government will come out with a set aside. So this becomes important. And if you know that you have what I call 3 or 4 companies that are HUBZone that go after this, and you know their skill set, they're going to put together good sources sought, and you notice there's a challenge and it doesn't come out, this is when I engage my small business representative to say, can you look at what they evaluated and take a look at it and just make sure they in fact were being fair and honest about their evaluation. Now they have data to look at. We've told them who submitted it, and this allows, especially what happens is we do it on the council level. It's not you as an individual saying they didn't do their job right. We do it as a council promoting HUBZone, saying we understand that at least 4 of our members or people in the HUBZone community certified went after this, and they have a reputation of putting forth good responses, if not excellent. Why didn't this come out that way? I'm telling you, this has moved the needle in so many ways. So this is another way to effectively strategize of making things set aside. So at least one of your colleagues, if not you, gets the win. Our next slide is even more fun. And that's the one that I say sole source. Why that's more fun is because on those rare occasions when you're the only one that's qualified to do the work, much like 8A, they can make a sole source to your organization. Now, that means that you have to be in that niche that nobody else can do. And that is very challenging, but there have been organizations and companies that I know of that have gotten the Sole Source Awards. And that can be up to 4.5 million for non-manufacturing, and you see 7.5 for manufacturing. This is when you just smile all the way to the bank and are so grateful. So our next one talks a little bit about something that I want people to be aware of. This one, all of these links on the right side are live. So if we go through this and you're like, well, I'm not at that place for Sole Source Awards yet, but come spring, I'm talking to a one of the agencies, and I think that I've developed some product or some analytics that is so different from anybody else that I think they could use my services as sole source. This is what you go to in order to put your case to the procurement officer that, why don't you look at us for sole source? So I wanted to make sure this was data rich, where you could respond and look at it at a later point and be able to make a great case for effectively using the HUBZone certification. Now, the next slide is, in fact, one of my favorites. And the reason why it's one of my favorites is because it is the Simplified Acquisition Threshold, the SAT. Okay. We have small businesses all over the place, and some of them are just getting started, and they're like, how am I going to get in the GovCon space? How is this going to work? Well, the threshold for this is 250K. This might mean that they're looking for a cybersecurity SME. That might represent only 150K. This allows you to, in fact, get your foot in the door of an agency for something that may take less than 30 days to process. The micro purchases, 10K. If you're doing training, if you're doing a quick assessment, might be 10K. One of the things I often remind folks is the federal procurement data, that FPDS can be your friend. And I say your friend, I'm going to say best friend, because that allows you to see all these awards that are just like 150, 50K, what have you. Boy, that's enough to get you out of COVID. These are things that allow you to, as you're starting to build your pipeline, this allows you to continue to have some work to pay off some of these bills and what have you. Particularly, a lot of these things don't have as many requirements. It might that you have to do documentation for a particular system or what have you. Here's where this is an untapped resource, and I won't tell you how many billions of dollars are spent in what we call the simplified acquisition arena. And as HUBZones, this is a great way to promote getting their numbers up to that 3% while they're not having, because sometimes, contracting officers think about the risk. This is low risk. Sometimes one of the things I know a company used to do is they'd notice a service was being done to develop some system, and they might come in and say, well, have you thought about the independent validation and verification, the IV&V in it? That could be something that is under 250 if it's a small system that's being brought to speed. And remember, these things can be, every 6 months, assessment on a new system. This gets your foot in the door. They start liking you, you start gaining past performance, and then when it gets bigger, you now have your own past performance that is built on your company's reputation, not on somebody else's. Those are the types of things that I really need you to look at, because that SAT, there are companies that have made all their money on SAT. There are companies that made all their money and built themselves to million and multi-million-dollar companies by, in fact, subcontracting. These are arenas that allow you to use your HUBZone certification in order to grow while you are looking at larger acquisitions. Our next slide just is a brief reminder of how you're going to stay compliant. Because making all that money, sometimes you take your eye off the ball and then you look up and say, wait a minute, the HUBZone folks that I hired, some of them are no longer in HUBZone. Some of them left the company for different jobs. Oh my gosh. This is one of the things that I want you to remember, how to stay compliant. That next slide talks about the recertification and program exams. Those links at the bottom go straight to the SBA when you click on them. So go ahead and be very mindful of those. One of the things I want to mention to you, hot off the press, probably in another couple of months, the Small Business Administration is about to release another system. And this system that they're developing should make it easier for HUBZones to stay compliant. They've broken up these modules into the firm information, how to manage employees, manage locations, and eligibility and verification. What they have you do online is plug in the person's name, their address, straight off of your, I want to say your sheet that has their salary and wages and everything. And you're able to plug it directly in, and you're able to run it ahead of time, just to be sure that you are compliant. Now, one of the things that I really like to get into at this point is the scrutiny that takes place. There seems to be some confusion by HUBZones about how the certification process is. It is every year is a recertification, yearly. But in that year, there may be multiple levels. First level is they go online and put a check and say, I'm, this, how many employees, this, and this. That's level one. Oftentimes, SBA looks at level one. You've been doing this for so many years. There's no red flags and you're done. Now, there may be something that shows a red flag and they ask additional questions. That's called the level two. That's still in that annual yearly certification. So they do level one first. And you may not hear anything and you may be done. But a month later, you may hear something. That's a level two. They saw some data that made them uncomfortable. And then if those additional questions still have flags, they still can ask for a level 3 full documentation that year, even though it's out of the ordinary. Now, every 3 years, no matter whether you had the level 1, the first year, second year, every 3 years, they do a level 3, which is the full documentation. So even though they say you're okay at level 1, they still have the ability to come back and ask for more information and then say you're not good. That is something that, because the way they respond saying we've accepted it, it makes people wonder, well, why did they come back? It's just they use, one of the things we say, they're kind of using incorrect language, but as long as it takes SBA to change the language, we're letting it go, but we're educating folks about that. So that scrutiny that takes place. So both of those links are links that you want to click on just to make sure that you're valid in doing what you're supposed to. Now, that next one is just a reminder. That next slide is a reminder about the bids. The attempt to maintain is the newest thing that is coming up. And that next slide talks about attempt to maintain. This is brand new. It's exciting. It basically says if you have a contract, a HUBZone contract that you're actually doing work on, and somehow your numbers fall under the 35%, they have to be at least 20% to keep you qualified as a HUBZone certified company. And if you're qualified and say you're 21%, then you can actually go after additional contracts. So that's something that changed, and it allows companies that are doing what they're supposed to be doing in order to move forward. And once again, attempt to maintain needs to be documented and all over the place, where you put ads and everything trying to ascertain HUBZone employees. I suggest self-promoting. Make sure that you go to the council's Workforce Connect, put those job requirements out there, because that can be a way that you document that you look for HUBZone employees. Our next slide is, in fact, some of the legislative priorities we're looking at. Evaluation preference on the task order level is one of the important things. And you'll see some of the state legislations that I mentioned earlier. Our next slide.
For the attempt to maintain, let's say there's a contract and they do either an option year or there's a change to the contract itself as far as the time for that business that had a HUBZone. For them to have that, rule of thumb, attempt to maintain as long as that contract is in, is that until the current contract that they were under, that they can still have that attempt to maintain? Or does it also apply if they're grandfathered into a new contract, if they gain an option year, they get
okay, if you have a if you have a contract, let's say you have a 2-year contract, and then they add an option year to it or extend it, and it's a HUBZone set aside contract. This is a HUBZone set aside contract. The attempt to maintain is applied. But it has to be a HUBZone set aside, not one that the government decided to check off the box. It was full and open and you happen to be HUBZone and you got it. No, that doesn't count. It has to be a set aside.
Perfect.
And our next page is basically reminding you that you can click on to find out more about the Trailblazer, who to contact at the council to become a member or sponsor, any of those things, and how to follow us on Twitter, social media, and everything else. And our final page is part 2. Part 2 is tomorrow, where you get to hear the success stories from folks that have been HUBZone companies. And 2 of them are current HUBZone companies. One just exited the program this year, and that's the Rely Group, because they got too big. They made too much money in leveraging their HUBZone certification, and now they are a mid-sized company, and that just happened this year. So I love hearing from companies that are kind of new to it, companies that are rocking and rolling, making multiple millions, and each one is in a different area. Habit Group is in Texas. Got to represent my Texas folks. We got Lions, 2 Lions Aerospace. They're in Florida. And Rely Group is right out in the Baltimore DMV area. So you're going to have an opportunity to ask them questions, find out some of the things they did to maintain their success and what they plan on doing in the future. And at this point, I have covered everything. There is one more slide. We're going to leave it on this slide, though. We have one more slide that talks about the quick links and stuff like that, and help desk and everything. But let's leave it on the slide for part 2. And like I said, some of these slides, my major goal was to make sure you had a reference so that when you have questions in the future, or you want to send it to one of your staff members that are going to be responsible for making sure you stay HUBZone compliant, or finding allied forces, they can help you out.
All right. That was to the T. Thank you all for being here today. And thank you. Big round of applause for Lily. Yes. Now, yes. Thank you for a great presentation. So as just a heads up, because we're right on the hour, presentation, yes, will be sent out, and recording for this, it will be posted 1 to 2 weeks later after we get our individual who will go over and clean up the video. But other than that, come with us, come to us, be with us for part 2 tomorrow. You will hear Lily once again, but you will also hear the individuals that she has brought on, so that way you can get the real nitty-gritty on the HUBZone, just in a way of personal experiences. But other than that, I'll leave for Lily to say her final comments and statements, and then we can just head it off for the day.
One of the things I want you to show up tomorrow is because all 3 of these individuals and their companies have been known to coach and mentor and consult with others. So for those that are just kind of like stuck, whether you're stuck at a couple of million, stuck at 10 million, or stuck at 100,000, These are individuals that you want to stay engaged in because they're going to help you get unstuck. And I want you to have a blessed day, and I hope to see all of you tomorrow.
Yes. All right. Bye, everyone.